all assume consists of American reinforcements moving in, certainly by air, clearly possibly by sea. Was the second thing, and one's got to assume a cataclysmic situation in Europe, would of course be Soviet counteraction. They're not going just to let these chaps roam around the place entirely unfettered and free. So we would quite literally be the meat in the sandwich.
In published information, the Home Office itself says that such military mobilization in Britain would cause
major disruption to the life of the country.
And this would lead to a situation of
shortages of essential commodities
and
general national emergency.
Getting troops to Europe and bringing refugees and casualties back is vital to reinforcement plans. Dozens of holiday ferries will be commandeered. Like other NATO shipping, they'll come under the control of a new international NATO Defence Shipping Authority. So the second stage of emergency powers gives the government authority to take control of every kind of transport: roads, railways, air and seaports. Under a series of secret joint logistic plans, many of these resources are to be taken over on behalf of the Americans. The plans are part of a secret agreement with the United States. The agreement's called the US-UK Lines of Communication Arrangement, US-UK LOC in military jargon. It was signed in London in 1973. Britain agreed to provide the US Armed Forces with supplies and services, including fuel and food. The plans cover everything that the US military can't conveniently bring with them. What's needed will, under emergency powers, have to be handed over by the civilian community.
We were looking for everything that was necessary to receive the material: ports, warehouses, supply depots, magazines, airfields, and then the ability to identify the material, assemble it into shipments, and to move it on into the battle zone.
But the arrangement was secret from Parliament for 13 years, until disclosures 2 years ago. Then, for the first time, the 1986 Annual Defence White Paper gave details of the arrangement. It's part of a new NATO concept called Host Nation Support. The list includes petrol and oil stockpiles, garages, parts and fuel, cars, buses and trucks. They're all part of what Britain has agreed to provide for US-UK Lines of Communication, or LOC. Rationing schemes will be introduced to control civilian use of food and important commodities. Petrol and oil wouldn't just be rationed. The plans reserve all supplies for government and military use. The plans also cover conscript labor. Thousands of people with many different skills would be needed.
You understand that it includes not only government support in the form of police and fire and border patrol and customs, etc., but it includes a wide variety of civilian support. The assumption is that the civilian population is going to be available and ready to support primarily a military operation.
These are some of the skills listed and required.
You may have a very good job in London working at the stock exchange or at, what's the big department store? Harrods, and suddenly find yourself in a work battalion assigned to the docks or assigned to an airport as a cargo handler. There's going to be requisition of labor probably as early as reinforced alert, and certainly uniformly applied in general alert or conditions of war.
The employment department's already made plans to identify those with the necessary skills. Kenneth Clark, Paymaster General, said,
"As part of the arrangement, the United Kingdom has agreed to take steps to try to ensure that their requirements for civilian manpower support are met. Detailed planning and support of the arrangement is classified."
I can imagine the political consequence of detailing the planning considerations for requisitioning labor in time of war. It's not a requirement that many of us want to think about in peacetime and would not accept, I believe, peacefully or quietly.
Burton Wood US Army Base near Warrington. Not just a warehouse, but the biggest warehouse in Britain, holding stocks to equip entire army divisions. Amongst the Burton Wood stockpile are 2 prefabricated 1,000-bed mobile hospitals for the US Army. Inside acres of wooden crates are all the parts needed to assemble them. But to put the hospital kits together, Britain has to provide, according to official US information, 182 railroad cars, 28 trailers, and 490 skilled workers. It'll be local people who'll be told to do that work. The mobile hospitals are part of a bigger plan to make Britain a US medical base.
In fighting in a theater, and the United States specializes in fighting in somebody else's theater, the object is to keep our people there as long as we can, to restore their health if they're injured, and to restore them to the combat forces as quickly as possible. This generates a tremendous pressure on the host nations to provide hospital beds, to provide treatment facilities. In the United Kingdom, we were looking for thousands and tens of thousands of hospital beds so that we could treat people in the zone, in the European theater, and keep them there for the combat forces. As long as they're in the theater, as soon as they're well, restored to duty, as we say, they go into combat.
Stobhill Hospital, Glasgow, part of the National Health Service. It's one of 3 hospitals in Scotland and about 30 in Britain, covered in the secret US-UK medical plans. The hospitals concerned are important to local emergency plans for civilian casualties. But the NHS emergency planner for this area has never been told what had happened. He just had rumours.
There is a certain amount of knowledge of that, yes. But it's in a very vague sort of position as far as we're concerned.
But Dr. Wilson hadn't even heard rumours that a second major hospital in his area was in the secret medical deal. Behind his back, the government also offered the United States the large Garth Naval General Hospital. Other hospitals would be provided by the Americans themselves. One of 3 such hospitals in Scotland is at Arbroath on the east coast. The US Navy will build its own 1,500-bed reserve hospital there. This old Gloucestershire airfield now accommodates one of a network of such US military reserve hospitals. Although they store millions of pounds worth of medical and surgical equipment, they're not to be used in peacetime by either British or American patients. And in a crisis, patients in civilian hospitals would just be sent home.
The effect on civilian hospital care is this: that the big infirmaries would be basically dealing with military casualties and would not be dealing with civilian, ordinary type of illnesses that they're normally dealing with at present time.
All over the country, health service planners have been put in the same position. It's government policy not to tell them which of many large hospitals have been secretly earmarked to meet US requirements. But should healthcare planners not be told which of their hospitals are committed to US military casualties?
I suppose we would, yes, it would to some extent be helpful, yes.
This is how Health Minister Ray Whitney explained the medical aspects of the US-UK arrangement to MPs last year.
Plans will be incorporated in those for the National Health Service as a whole in time of crisis or war.
That's Whitehall speak for saying that the individual parts of the health service, its regional administrators, are not being told. So all the details of the US-UK lines of communication arrangement are still secret from Parliament, and even from those in government who need to know. The Secretary of State for Defence between 1974 and 1976, Roy Mason, told us that he was never informed about the agreement. His successor, Lord Mully, was aware that an arrangement had been made, but he wasn't told about plans to be based on it. That's all the more remarkable when it's noted that the parallel agreements with West Germany are public documents. This is the British-German Host Nation Support Agreement. The parallel US-German treaty reports exactly and publicly how nearly 93,000 German civilians will work in support of US forces. So outside Britain, the existence of host nation support plans has almost always been a matter of public record. Britain's almost unique in NATO in having kept its emergency laws secret. 14 out of 15 other NATO nations have debated such laws and put them on the statute book.
We're very worried that the government haven't disclosed plans for the next round of emergency legislation which they may introduce, because it is now that Parliament ought to be saying, well, is this really the best way of going about it? And it's now that we ought to be debating it, because during the Second World War a lot of miscarriages of justice happened to a lot of innocent people. So it's now that Parliament needs to be looking at that legislation, deciding whether the safeguards are there, deciding whether it's necessary, or even if it should be tightened up.
the bills exist in draft form already, and under pressure of time and so on, that's what's likely to be introduced, and Parliament's going to be under pressure to pass these bills rapidly, and the amount of discussion is going to be very limited. And so in effect, what's being decided now inside Whitehall is what is almost certainly going to happen.
Do you think it's necessary to keep all aspects of war emergency legislation secret?
The answer, if you say all aspects, I mean, the answer is no, because manifestly a lot of them are not secret. I mean, on the whole, in a democracy, we ought, I think, to try and carry the people along with us.
Our democracies depend upon the willingness of the informed citizen to support the plans and objectives of the leadership. Now, if the plans and objectives are not ones that the citizens will support, they ought to have the information to assess the situation and reach that judgment intelligently.
Horse Guards Parade, London, is where one day this story might end. It's a magnet where tourists now happily gather by the score. But if we ever reached Emergency Powers Stage 3, there'd be a much more solemn and serious gathering here.
The final bill is passed presumably just before a nuclear attack, which gives the government virtually powers to run the country as it sees fit, virtually winding up everything as we know it. There would be special courts with powers to try people and indeed sentence them to death.
Until a nuclear attack is judged imminent, civil servants are all supposed to be at their desks in Whitehall offices a few yards away. Then a chosen few would be telephoned and told, Operation Chanticleer has begun. They've then to pick up their papers and run here. A convoy of military buses and escorts will be ready to whisk them out of London. With the nucleus of cabinet ministers, they could be soon all that's left of national government if Britain is attacked. Then, with London emptying and in disarray, and the government itself buried under the English countryside, no one really expects that Parliament will meet to pass the third pre-nuclear attack bill. It had just become law by executive decree.
Come on, quick, get down!
For most of Britain, there'd be nowhere to hide from a nuclear attack.
In peacetime, people don't like to think about the ultimate demands of wartime. I'm sure that there's a conscious decision to avoid any public discussion of these implications of our war plans.
And just let's keep it secret.
Just not bring it up. We're not keeping a secret, we're just not disclosing it for public discussion.